The pen trembled in Maria's hand as she signed the divorce papers. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto the wooden table where she and James had shared thousands of meals over their 15 years of marriage. Behind her, James stood with his arms crossed, his face hard as stone. In the doorway, their daughter Rachel watched silently, her eyes red from crying. It had been exactly 1 week since they buried Maria's mother. 7 days since Maria had laid her beloved mama to rest in the quiet cemetery on the edge of town. 7 days since she had felt James's hand slip away from hers during the funeral service. 7 days since her world had crumbled into pieces, so small she didn't know if she could ever put them back together. Now, as the afternoon light filtered through the curtains of their home, Maria finished signing away her marriage. The lawyer, a thin man with tired eyes, gathered the papers quickly, as if he wanted to escape the heavy sadness that filled the room. "It's done," James said, his voice flat and empty. Maria looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of the man she had married. The man who had promised to love her in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. But that man seemed to have disappeared, replaced by this stranger who couldn't bear to look at her anymore. "Why?" Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "Why now, James?" "I just lost my mother. I need you." James turned away, staring out the window at the street beyond. "I can't do this anymore, Maria. You've been so wrapped up in your grief. For months, it's been all about your mother. I feel like I don't even have a wife anymore." The words cut through Maria like a knife. It was true that she had spent the last 6 months caring for her dying mother. True that she had slept at the hospital more nights than she had slept in her own bed. True that she had barely had time for James or Rachel or even herself. But her mother had been dying, and now she was gone, and so was James. "Please," Maria begged, standing up from the table. "Please don't do this. Give me time. I'll get better. I just need time to heal." But James was already walking toward the door, picking up the suitcase he had packed that morning. "I've already moved my things to an apartment downtown. My lawyer will be in touch about the property division." Rachel ran to her father, grabbing his arm. "Dad, please don't leave. Mom needs us." James's face softened for just a moment as he looked at his daughter. "You can stay with me on weekends, sweetheart. This isn't about you. Your mother and I, we just can't make this work anymore." And then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded like the end of everything Maria had ever known. She sank to the floor, her whole body shaking with sobs. Rachel sat down beside her, wrapping her thin arms around her mother's shoulders. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the wreckage of their family. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Maria's life. She moved through her days like a ghost, going to her job at the elementary school where she taught 2nd grade, coming home to a house that felt too empty and too quiet. Rachel tried to stay cheerful, but Maria could see the sadness in her daughter's eyes every time she left for a weekend with James. Maria's friends from church brought casseroles and kind words, but nothing seemed to fill the hollow space inside her chest. She had lost her mother and her husband in the span of a single week. The grief was so heavy she could barely breathe under the weight of it. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in November, everything changed. Maria was sitting at her kitchen table, drinking coffee and staring at nothing, when there was a knock at her door. She shuffled to answer it, expecting a neighbor or perhaps another well-meaning friend with a tuna casserole. Instead, she found a tall woman in a crisp gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Thompson?" "Maria Thompson?" the woman asked. "It's Martinez now," Maria said quietly. "I went back to my maiden name. Can I help you?" The woman smiled gently. "My name is Catherine Wells. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates. I represent the estate of Eleanor Martinez, your mother. May I come in?" Maria's heart skipped. She stepped aside, letting the lawyer enter her home. They sat at the same table where Maria had signed her divorce papers just 3 weeks earlier. Catherine opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I apologize for not contacting you sooner. Your mother's estate has been in probate, and there were numerous assets that needed to be properly documented and evaluated." Maria blinked in confusion. "Assets?" "My mother lived in a tiny apartment. She worked as a seamstress her whole life. She didn't have anything." Catherine's smile widened. "That's what she wanted people to think. But your mother was an extraordinarily careful woman. Ms. Martinez. She saved every penny she could. She invested wisely, and she inherited a substantial amount from her own mother. Your grandmother, many years ago. The lawyer opened the folder and turned it so Maria could see the numbers on the page. Maria's vision blurred. She blinked and looked again, certain she was reading it wrong. $30 million? She whispered. 30,200,000 and change, Catherine confirmed. In addition to several properties, stocks, bonds, and other investments. Your mother left everything to you, Ms. Martinez. Every single penny. Maria's hands flew to her mouth. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The numbers on the page seemed impossible. Like something from a dream or a movie, not real life. But why didn't she tell me? Why did she live in that tiny apartment? Why did she keep working when she was so sick? Catherine's expression softened with understanding. I asked her that very question once. She told me that she wanted you to learn the value of hard work. She wanted you to build your own life, make your own way. She said that if you knew about the money, it might change you, and she loved exactly who you were. Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of wonder and love and overwhelming gratitude for a mother who had given her one final, incredible gift. Over the next few weeks, Maria worked with Catherine to understand the full extent of her inheritance. There were properties in 3 different states, investment portfolios that her mother had carefully managed, and the liquid assets that totaled that staggering $30 million. Maria was, quite suddenly, a very wealthy woman. But money, she discovered, couldn't heal a broken heart. It couldn't bring back her mother or fix her shattered marriage. What it could do, however, was give her choices, freedom, a chance to build something new from the ruins of her old life. She paid off the mortgage on her house. She set up a trust fund for Rachel's education. She donated $1 million to the hospital where her mother had spent her final days, funding a new wing for cancer patients. And then, one quiet Saturday afternoon, James came to pick up Rachel for his weekend visit. He stood in the doorway of the home he had once shared with Maria, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in months. Warmth, interest, a hint of regret. You look good, Maria, he said. Different somehow, lighter. Maria smiled. She was wearing a new dress, and she had gotten her hair done for the first time in months. She had started eating better, sleeping better. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer consumed her every waking moment. I'm doing better, she said simply. James shifted his weight, glancing past her into the house. I heard you made a donation to Memorial Hospital. That was really generous. Where did you... that must have been your savings. Maria's smile widened slightly. He had heard. Of course he had. News traveled fast in their small town, and $1 million donation didn't go unnoticed. It was the right thing to do, she said. Rachel came bounding down the stairs, backpack in hand. She kissed her mother goodbye and ran to her father's car. James lingered in the doorway. Listen, Maria, I've been thinking. Maybe we were too hasty. Maybe we could try again. Go to counseling or something. For Rachel's sake. Maria looked at the man who had left her in her darkest hour. The man who had walked away when she needed him most. And she felt surprisingly no anger, no bitterness. Just a calm, clear certainty about what she needed to say. No, James, she said gently. I don't think so. You made your choice when I needed you to stand by me. I've made my peace with that. I hope you find happiness, I really do. But that happiness won't be with me. James's face fell. Is this because of the money? Did you come into some inheritance or something? Maria didn't answer. She simply smiled and began to close the door. Goodbye, James. Take care of our daughter. As she closed the door, she heard him call out, Maria, wait! Can we at least talk about this? But Maria was already walking back into her house, back to the life she was building. A life funded not just by her mother's money, but by her mother's love and wisdom. A life where she knew her worth, with or without a man who couldn't see it. That evening, Maria sat in her mother's rocking chair, the one piece of furniture she had kept from her mother's apartment. She held a photograph of them together, taken just a year before her mother's diagnosis. Thank you, Mama, she whispered to the picture. For everything. For teaching me to be strong. For loving me enough to let me struggle. And for giving me the freedom to choose my own happiness. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the world in a blanket of pure white. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start, and Maria, for the first time in months, felt ready to embrace it.